Hello Big Geeks, welcome to a new series in which we're going to be drinking some of the most important beers ever brewed as we dig into the glorious beers of the Trappist monasteries. Welcome to a new series that digs into the incredible beers and stories of the Trappist breweries. These are beers made within the walls of a Trappist monastery by or under the supervision of monks and purely for the upkeep of the monk's way of life or good causes. Despite that, or maybe because of that, they have had a huge impact on how and what we drink today. Some of the best beers in the world come from Trappist breweries, but not a huge amount is known about them due to the limited access lay people have to them and a little bit of that classic Belgian brewing mysticism. We hope one day to visit as many as will let us in, but for now, we're going to be taking you through them one by one to give you the history, the impact, and of course the flavours that they have given the world, all from our own place of worship, the Brewdio. The reason I wanted to do this series is because monastery beer, the monasteries hundreds of years ago, were the innovators, the creators, and indeed the biggest brewers on the planet. So back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, most people were brewing, in inns, in their own homes, on big houses for big rich bastards. Yeah. And the monasteries were the first people that really kind of centralised that and started to go, we'll brew it for the town or whatever it is. And they were doing that to fund the upkeep of their way of life. So we can see, particularly within Belgium, within Germany, and to some extent within the UK and within the Czech Republic, still huge influences of the monastic way of brewing. Most Belgian beer styles kind of came out of those monastic traditions. And what we're left with now is only a couple of breweries that are sort of certified Trappist. So this is a particular sect of Christianity. They have very strict rules. Their whole life is based around prayer, reading and manual labour. I don't think they really leave the monasteries in which they live, and they still fund their way of life through brewing, many of them.
So what you're saying to me, Johnny, is they're like sort of like the Cosa Nostra of the monk world. They're like a gang that once you're in, you're for life. You're never leaving. But you do get to drink and make some incredible beer. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anybody's tried to escape a Trappist monastery or leave it. There's probably a C movie in that. Maybe we'll make it. But yeah, I mean, it is a way of life, and brewing is part of that, as is cheese making and bread baking as well. You can go to the cafes of some of these Trappist breweries and have bread made by the monks, cheese made by the monks, and beer made by the monks, which I highly recommend doing. I've been to the Orval one and the Westmalle one. Actually, today's brewery are the only ones that don't have one in Belgium, I think. But they still produce a huge amount of beer, about 15,000 hectolitres, so that's triple the size of most breweries in the UK, if they're like the average size. So these are big concerns, and the rules to be called a Trappist brewery does mean the monks still have to be involved. Right. So the monks are getting on a bit. There's a bit of an employment crisis in monking at the moment. Recruitment is down.
It is down a little bit. Even the free beer wasn't really helping, which means that mostly they're more doing admin stuff. But there are some monasteries where they are literally still brewing.
Admin monks.
Yeah, admin monks. So we've talked about what a Trappist brewery generally is. Shall we dig into the wonderful Rochefort, who we've picked to start with because they make our favourite Trappist beer?
Come on, let's do it.
Wait, so Rochefort, as a site, as a holy site,
yes,
pretty old. We're talking about 1230, they reckon the first sort of religious building was built on this site in sort of very southeast Belgium. Wow. It was a nunnery to start with in 1230, so it was built by like the local, I don't know, duke or whatever, founded a nunnery, and then the lads came along about 200 years later, these laddie monks, and went, we've got a smaller place for you, and they took over in the early 1400s. So that is the start of a pretty turbulent story, right? Even before the booze gets involved, we've got some serious adventures.
Yeah, go on.
Due to war, it was abandoned in 1650, 1652, and then again in 1653. Tough couple of years there. In 1897, it was finally completely closed and turned into a farm. And then brewing restarted in 1899. Stopped for a bit when the Germans nicked all of the copper tanks in the First World War. Slowed down a bit for the Second World War, and then it nearly burnt down in 2010.
Wow. So nearly a millennia.
Yeah, of an absolute show, as far as I can tell. Just, wow. If you were religious, you were persecuted. It was quite a dangerous job being a monk. which might explain why they turned to booze. So they've been brewing, like I said, since the 1500s, but that was mostly for themselves, maybe a little bit for the towns, but really the proper brewing started in 1899. And so the people that bought it when it was a farm, the people that bought it back for the Trappist monasteries was actually the monks of Achel. So another former Trappist brewery now, I believe. I don't think they exist anymore, sadly. The last monk has gone.
So he did them a solid, the Arkle boys.
Yeah, way back in 1899.
Wow, that's nice.
But it's about 50 years later that we start to see some of these beers start to appear, although the history of the triple is a little bit interesting. So that really started when Chimay, which is, I think, probably the closest other Trappist brewery, started having quite a lot of commercial success with their beers and actually started eroding sales from Rochefort. Now, obviously, monks shouldn't really be in competition with each other.
No.
So the Chimay people again did them a solid, relying on the kindness of other monks here, Rochefort, and came along and said, like, right, we'll help you with the quality. We'll make sure that what you're producing is really great. So they came over and started to, well, basically they suggested that they improve their equipment, that they improve their hygiene. I presume that was to do with the brewing, not just generally. And also advised them on lots of different things, such as getting their own yeast. So they now have their own house yeast that's entirely unique. And also made a very interesting suggestion, which might answer a question that lots of people have, which is why, up until this beer came out, did Rochefort only make dark beers? And that's because Chimay, when they came over, suggested they did that because of their water source, which is full of calcium carbonate, so kind of London-esque. So great for dark beer, not so great for lighter beers that well, Westmalle was having huge success with its Westmalle triple, but they couldn't necessarily do that with the water that they had. So we'll see that these three beers, the first three beers that were made, are all pretty dark.
That amazes me that they knew about the sort of different minerals in the water and what they would kind of lend themselves to in terms of which styles of beer would be successful.
Yeah, I mean, they were traditional in their outlook and in their beliefs, but in terms of the actual brewing, particularly Chimay, were very, very forward-thinking, and that put them in good stead. And Chimay's a huge brewery now. So this is the 6, right? There's a very interesting. We've talked about this on the channel multiple times about why they're called like doubles, triples, and stuff like that. And these names, I don't know whether it comes from that, but interestingly, it takes 6 weeks to brew this, from brew day to release, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. So that's how it's easy to remember for the monks. So this is 6. So this is essentially almost a Belgian amber, or a Belgian special is what they might call it.
Okay.
It's 7.5%, so it's stronger than a special, like, say, Palm Special. But it is a sweet, yeast-driven, caramelly kind of beer. And the interesting link between this and Palm is the fact that the yeast that they took in the 50s was Palm's yeast. It's banoffee.
It is well banana-y, mate.
Yeah.
And yeah, incredibly toffee.
Yeah. It smells absolutely miraculous. I love it. I could sniff that all day. It's almost German Weissbier, right? That level of banana, little hints of clove, a little bit less sweet than a Hefeweizen, but not much. And that malt character is just massive.
Heady.
Yeah. Yeah. And 7.5, you're not even going to know.
That's a great way to start.
What I like is so brioche-y, like sweet and bready, caramelly. Dolce de leche is a tasting note I use all the time because I get that so much from these malts.
You're right with the sort of brioche thing. It feels like almost like liquid bread, doesn't it? A little bit. Not quite as thick as some of the liquid breads I've had in my life, but that's probably because it's 7.5 and not like 11.
Yeah, well, we'll get to those. Although actually, these are quite light as well, considering because of the use of sugars, which we'll dive into. But yeah, so this only makes up about less than 10% of the sales of the brewery, which is unusual because usually actually stronger beers would take up less. They only brew it a couple of weeks of the year, I guess because the way that Belgian culture went is they went for the stronger beers. But it is absolutely delicious. I can't think of a 7.5% beer I'd really rather drink. The only rival for me would be Westmalle Double, which is miraculous, a bit darker, very different beer. But yeah, pretty special if you ask me.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hey.
Amen. So now we're going to move to the 8. So it takes 8 weeks to brew.
8 weeks.
Yeah, it's 9.2.
Whoa.
And this was really tricky. I got down a dead end. I have read, you've got them here. I've read books for the last couple of weeks trying to find out, scoured the internet. I cannot find the end of this sentence, but this was commissioned by a very important client.
'Twas I. No, it wasn't me. How long ago, Johnny? A while back.
So, I think in the 50s as well.
Okay.
So, I can only assume some kind of royalty.
When was Jean-Claude Van Damme birthed?
So the recipe, or at least the ingredients for each of the 3 core beers, are the same.
Yes.
2 pale malts, Pilsner malts, and a Munich malt, Styrian Goldings, and Hallertau hops, which is where we might get some spice and some lemon and stuff like that.
Lovely.
Added 2 times during the boil.
Nice.
And then their own house yeast and their own well water. So incredibly simple recipes.
What's the difference between them, Johnny?
Volume, how much of each you put in.
Right, yeah.
So in terms of the actual colour, it's not going to vary that much because the recipe is essentially the same. But it does get darker as we go along. And that can be down to maybe they put a little bit more Munich in, maybe they put a little bit more dark Belgian candy sugar in or stuff like that. But it's all just tweaks of the same recipe to get to the different strengths. And we'll see if this beer smells different or whether we still get all that kind of palm yeast banana-iness.
Not as banana-y for me.
See, now we're starting to get a little bit of fennel, a little bit of kind of floralness and nail polish, and
Yeah, it's definitely
starting to feel boozy, sherry-like.
boozy burn.
In fact, sweet sherry I get from that for sure.
Yeah, the banana is gone. Banana's left the building, Johnny.
Well, I think there's still banana. I just think it's caramelised, you know?
Okay. Like it's been sort of fried in a frying pan.
Exactly.
With sugar.
Flambéed a little bit. So we've got some booziness. Yeah, there we go. Flambanoffy.
Flambanoffy. You heard it here first.
Yeah. And you'll never hear it again. Right, let's give this a taste.
Oh, yeah. Way more caramel note.
Yeah. So, but weirdly, it does feel a little bit lighter than the first one. So
somehow.
Maybe it's a little drier. Maybe sugar's been used in this. There's a little... I mean, it's not roast, but it feels a little bit more toasty. And then, yeah, just like burnt caramel kind of vibes.
That's great.
Yeah. It's really... where that one is... I wouldn't say it's simplistic, but it's incredibly drinkable and moreish and nourishing. This one feels a little bit naughty.
I would have that with like some sort of roast pork or something.
Oh, yeah.
Like honey roast pork.
Yeah. Do you know, an interesting thing about the Trappists at Rochefort is they don't really drink their beer. So most breweries, most Trappist breweries, they'll have like a smaller version of their beer. So you have Westmalle Extra, you've got Petit Orval, Little Orval. They only drink, the monks here only drink on special occasions. So they don't brew like almost like a table beer.
They're not party monks.
They start at 7.5. You know, when they party, they go all out. You know, it's no like I'll start slow, see how I feel. It's all in, but
it's Chinese Oktoberfest all over again. Party because they're not drinking every day. When they go for it, they go hard.
They go for it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Scenes.
So now we come to one of the top 10 beers in the world. For me, we've compared it favourably to the one that's supposedly the best in the world, the Westie 12, and we preferred it.
Yeah, it absolutely smashed the Westie, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. It is miraculous. Again, same recipe almost as the others. It's just tweaking quantities. This one's great to age as well. I don't believe that this has any age on it. No, this was brewed in July, so it's bang fresh.
Okay.
The other thing worth noting is that with a lot of Trappist beers, they'll use not only the same yeast strain but the same yeast. So they'll brew the 6.
Yeah.
From the 6, they'll take the yeast to the 8. From the 8, they'll take it to the 10. And that way, you never stress the yeast. The yeast is, has its tolerances and it's going and it's loving life, and you end up with a really clean ferment. And
they'll take it off the batch.
Exactly that. Yeah. So they're cropping between them.
Right.
And each time you start with the fresh yeast, go up the scale, dump that yeast, go up the scale. Well, you might do a couple of generations with it, but yeah. So even the same yeast from similar batches is going in. Wow. So now we're figgy, prunes, dates, loads of dark fruits, a slightly acidic tang to it as well.
Yeah, almost a little bit balsamic-y.
Yeah.
Little tiny bit though.
And that's a yeast in a further generation as well, so it will have adapted, it will have changed a little bit, which is why you can only use yeast for a certain time, because eventually the profile changes so much that it's not really what you started with.
It's almost like sort of Super Mario character going along a platform game and leveling up every time and getting a new power up where they can fly, they can shoot
That's what's happening to the
fireballs
yeast.
out of their face. Yeah. This is a fireball out of the face kind of yeast. This is kind of crazy.
Let's give it a go.
Whoa. Blah, blah, blah.
So this is the strongest Trappist beer at 11.3. To get to that level, as you notice, it's not that sweet on the finish. And that's because they use lots of dark Belgian candy sugar, which helps attribute to the colour.
Yeah.
And also it means you can get to that really high gravity, that really high alcohol level without adding sweetness, because all of the sugar ferments out. But this is the one you'd want to age, because I think you'd bring out more sherry, more... What I find is like almost a tequila flavour when I age really strong beers. It just adds something almost untouchable, intangible, almost umami-esque. And it's wonderful. I mean, I would even say you wouldn't want to drink this too fresh, because I think that it would be... This is maybe a shade fresh, you know, and I think that's why it might feel a little bit kind of... like we got that slight balsamic-y kind of vibe. I think it needed to... Yeah, it's a little bit too punchy.
Maybe a little bit.
Exactly, because it's a relatively young fermentation that's happened in there. It's a beer that only gets more complex, more exciting. It's proof that beer can be as complex, as alcoholic, as... what's the kind of... The opposite of sippable, like musable. Where you just want to sit back and enjoy it and muse on it.
This is a beer to sort of be shared, I think, of an evening, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You've had your honeyed ham earlier in the day. You're a bit sozzled.
You're having a wonderful day.
Now you're sat by your open fire, and you're talking about, you know, the monks of old.
Yeah.
And how they're sort of like Jedis of the beer force.
Is that what we're talking about?
I don't know. Maybe.
Right.
Maybe they are. It's a Trappist.
Jesus, I knew you were going to go there.
Johnny, I'd say what a time to be alive, but these beers have been around forever.
For 70 years.
So, like, it's been the time to be alive for
70
years.
Certainly if you live near Rochefort, yeah. Now, one of these beers hasn't been alive for 70 years.
Okay.
One of these beers, I don't know if you can see on this bottle, says 1920 and then 2020. This is a beer recipe that was dug out of the archives from the time when Rochefort probably wasn't having a great time in 1920. You know, they'd just been through the war, had their coppers nicked, but they were still brewing. I'm not quite sure what on, but they were still making beer, because they made a recipe, a blonde beer, probably inspired by Westmail's Triple, which came out in 1905, I believe it was.
Okay.
And it didn't prove popular, so they binned it. And then they dug it out in, well, presumably before 2020, to try and give it another go.
Okay.
So this is their triple. It's the first beer they've released in 60, 70 years.
This is
the first new beer. Brand new beer. So 2 years old.
They exercised it.
Yeah,
and then they resurrected it.
Yeah. They also put, so, curvata resurgo. It means I am bent and I straighten. It is the...
Is that Latin?
Yeah. It's their motto.
I'm bent and I straighten.
So, yeah. So it's saying, you know, when you're bowed and broken,
yeah,
you can come back up.
That's great. I like that.
And that's what this beer has done.
Nice. So
this is a Belgian triple in the Westmail style. I have to be honest, the first time I had this, I disliked it. I thought it was too light, too phenolic, a little bit thin. You'll remember at the start of this video I said that they only brew dark beers.
Yeah, this is very light.
Which is why I think it took them a long time to come up with a triple, because triples sell extremely well. They're a very popular style in Belgium, and they didn't have one. I think that's partly because they had to work out how they were going to do it. You know, maybe they had to buy the equipment to deal with the water.
Yeah, they might have treated the water.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So
great.
Let's get the aroma on it. So again, there is that little slight note of balsamic of something really like acidic red berry, like tart cherry kind of thing. It seems to be a profile of the yeast when it's really going for it.
It's nowhere near as sort of verbose and big as the other beers, is it?
Yeah, much lighter. Almost like a lager like sulphuriness to it. So it's very light.
Yeah.
But then it's also got that nail polish, a kind of buttery bread brioche thing again, which will be coming. I mean, I guess probably the recipe for this is they've just taken the Munich malt out. So it's those two Pilsner malts. When I think of a triple, I do think of banana and clove and pear and apple.
This is not.
No. No, it's interesting beer. Let's see what it's like to taste. Oh, a silky mouthfeel. That was
That's pretty nice.
We talk about it a lot, like skips melting on your tongue.
Yeah. I don't hate it, Johnny.
It's got none of the really big complexity of Westmalle Triple, but it is incredibly drinkable. It's got a lovely, really quite addicting sweetness to it.
It's got a sharpness to it as well, which is like a bit like.
It's almost got a hint of hoppiness, right? Like, I wonder whether this is quite a highly hopped. They say it's like the old recipe with a modern twist. I wonder if the modern twist is a heavier hopping rate than you might expect for a triple.
So yeah, there is.
Sort of the monk saying, we're down with the kids.
Yeah.
Kids like hops.
There is a hop bitterness to it. Now you sort of pointed it out.
It's just weird. It's weird.
It's playful for sure and different, and I appreciate the monks, if they be admin monks or for real brewer monks.
I do think so. Different. I was reading. If you want to learn more about the this is an amazing book. Everything Michael Jackson writes is amazing. But there's this from Jeff Van der Steen.
Yes.
And he's recently been round. I think when was this published? 2010.
Not that loose.
And when he went round, there were monks brewing at Rochefort.
Okay. Cool.
So as recently as 12 years ago. But 12 years is a long time. If you're a 60-year-old monk, you can brew. If you're a 72-year-old monk, you might be bent and you ain't straightening again. So I don't know whether they're still actually on the brew teams or not, or whether they're admin monks. Nothing against admin monks.
So I'm so glad we've jumped off the Trappist cliff with Rochefort. You've had a hard time of it, and they've had support from their brothers in the different Trappist monasteries. And that's a sort of a story of triumph over adversary.
There's a lot to learn from the way that these people have lived their lives for a long time. Simplicity, beer, bread and cheese. So yeah, a great jumping in point. Rochefort will be back soon with some more winter warmers from the good admin monks of the Trappist order. Until then, love and beer.